I'm fairly certain that our mental image of a maximum security prison doesn't involve mentor programs, book club, and cognitive therapy. And yet, that is exactly what my expert today has introduced as a new style of prison reform. Welcome to the Just Dumb Enough podcast, a show that acknowledges no one is always an expert by dispelling misconceptions with real experts. I'm your host as always, Colton Petrie. My guest today is Dr. Kim Nugent. Kim has worked to propagate mentor programs in all avenues of life. Or so she thought until she was approached to write a peer mentor guide for convicted criminals with hefty felony sentences. Join us as she explains the story that brought her program to life, the ways it can truly save the lives of people who just need a second chance, and how this might actually benefit your small or large business. Let's advocate for prison reform. Welcome to the show, Dr. Kim Nugent.
Thank you very much, Colton. Happy to be here.
Yes, I am very, very excited to have you on the show. Why don't you introduce who you are and what you do for people?
So I have written a book a number of years ago, actually, called From Prison to Possibilities. And I actually work in maximum security prisons in Florida, Mississippi, and Texas. And I work directly with inmates that potentially could be leaving prison or maybe not. Maybe they have life sentences because I am working in maximum security prisons. And so there's a place for everyone, but it's basically a peer mentorship program where I work with them to teach them how to become a mentor. It's a very structured program, but we're getting great results. I'm super excited about it. And it's really some of the most rewarding work I have ever done in my entire life. And I've done some really amazing things.
Well, that's wonderful. I mean, especially to get to do this over multiple states and different environments. What brought you to the prison system in general? How'd you get there? It's an unusual place for people to end up if they're not incarcerated.
Well, what I would say, first of all, is that I am known as a mentorship expert in a lot of different industries. Let's start there. And because I personally benefited from having a mentor, I know the difference it can make in people's lives. I was in the hospitality industry in the very beginning years, like 25 years, and then pivoted into higher education. And so those two things, service and education, to me are two complementary skills, I think, that are really helpful. But one day I received a phone call from a gentleman out in Arizona. I did not know him. He had written a book, and he had found out that I had written a lot of books about mentorship in particular. And he was volunteering in a prison in Arizona. And he was doing meditation work and was seeing some really good results with people. And so he asked me, he said, have you ever seen a book on mentorship in prisons? And I said, no, I've seen a lot of books about gentlemen who have gotten out and have told their stories, very inspiring, but I've never seen anything like what you're talking about. And he said, would you consider writing one? And I said yes, and then hung up the phone and went, what the heck did I just say yes to? And the reason I said that is because I don't write about anything I don't know about. And I went on a 5-year journey of research. Name it, I've probably done it, been there, visited, taught in prisons, met wardens, gone to conferences. I've been to death row. I've done a variety of different things to educate myself about the experience of being in a prison once those doors are locked and you lose everything. And from that, it was a book, honestly, Colton. And I had no idea what was available as a result of that. I was invited to go to actually 2 prisons in Mississippi to start, maximum security prisons, and work directly with the inmates. And from that experience, it's turned into something much larger. But I am so proud of those men because it's really, it's peer-led, first of all. And because they have shared experiences, I like to use some of the things that they say, which is real talk. And when it's real talk, I think that you probably know, based on your past experience, but there are a lot of organizations out there that like to have mentorship programs. There's a lot of universities that like to have mentorship programs. Great idea. However, typically they fall apart. And the reason they fall apart is because there's no structure. You're leaving it up to the mentor and mentee to sort of figure out, well, how often do we want to meet? What do we want to talk about? And that kind of thing. And maybe for the first I don't know, 3 times. It's great, but then it sort of kind of wanes. And the book itself is set up for 26 weeks. And specifically, that is so that every week, a small group, usually it's four mentees to one mentor, and they're meeting for about an hour. And they do have homework. They have to come in, they have to have read the chapter, which is about a page and a half, and answer the questions. And then the mentor has questions that they're going to ask. And they can say it any way they want to. But it really is a structured program. And at the very end, the most exciting part, of course, for me is day one training. But at the very end is also I get to go back. I'm invited back and we have a formal graduation. And it's amazing to see these lives change. When they come in, they're not really sure what they've signed up for, to tell you the truth. And then after 2 days, I get them the opportunity to say, yes, I want to do this, or no, I don't. And what I always say to them is, if you're a yes, that's fantastic. Thank you very much. And I look forward to the journey. If you're a no, and you, at the end of 2 days of spending the training time with me, I respect that. Thank you for being with me. And that's it. But I said, I can't have you be a maybe. A maybe is one of those words that would truly, about 5 weeks in, if you're a maybe, you might quit. And if you do that, those men are counting on you, and I can't have that. So I need a real commitment that this is something you want to do. And I've been so proud of the journey for the mentors. And then ultimately what happens is those mentees, if they choose, can become mentors. So we continue to grow that. And then the mentors, because they've invested so much time, and if they still have a sentence to serve, and many do, some life sentences, what'll happen is then I go back and I teach them some more enhanced coaching skills, because we can use it, and they become more of an infrastructure to help the programming or the assistant wardens with the program, taking some pressure off. They've already gone through it. So once you go through something the first time, you get it at one level. When you go through it a second time, you get it at a whole nother level. And so we've continued to do that. And ultimately, my goal in every single facility is to find someone who has a passion around this, is found maybe teaching for themselves, or the coaching and mentoring, they just love it and they've never even considered that. So then I teach them to be me. And that's really the best way to do it, because it's never my program. I always say it's always their program. Whatever they do with it, they're going to make it their program.
Well, and this is very interesting because it kind of flies in the face of what we see in TV and media, where
Mm.
you're like, prison is all about you, you're out for yourself. It's very hostile and separated, and that no one wants to help anyone. And you're like, well, realistically, like, there are people that want to help. Some people are genuinely reforming, in our prison system. And especially those people that have a life sentence, like, okay, well, then you kind of earned, a free person to like bring into this program, that you now have a resource that is added to a program, and they get more perspective than probably anyone, because they're like, I've run 16 of these courses over the course of the last 8 years, right? If they run like a 6-month program, they're like, I've run so many of these, and I've seen every spectrum of person come through here. So now I have the perspective not only of being in prison, but also of talking to all of you.
Yes, and let me say it maybe a little bit differently. So, people who are in the program who have life sentences, that was not the original criteria, to tell you the truth. Originally, it was they had, basically 1 or 2 years left on their sentence. And this would be because we're doing two things at the same time. We're working on employability skills, meaning changing behaviors and skills. Because when they get out, you want to be around people you want to work with, right? Who have a great attitude and definitely have the right behaviors, like getting to work on time and those things, and can communicate. But they also develop a very practical and realistic plan for release, all the things that they need to consider, that maybe, and it's all in one place. So they're not having to look at a lot of different resources. But for the gentlemen who have a life sentence, for many of them, they have found their purpose, meaning giving back to somebody else. And that gets them out of bed in the morning. And the other thing is that programming fills idle time. When you have the violence that you have in prisons, it's because there's no programming going on. So I work with some amazing wardens, I will say that, who really do believe in programming, who also believe in really changing the lives of people. If they choose to change, that's a whole different deal. But the truth is, there are many, many, many violent prisons out there. and it isn't safe and anything else. But those prisons that are committed to programming, and not just my program, but whether it's GED or it's certification or getting them ready to have real job skills when they leave, that is so important. And all those things put together, like recreation time, getting outside, and their anger management classes. There's a lot of people out there really committed to making a difference, just not enough yet.
Well, and I think it's important to probably define for all the people who have never been inside of a prison system in any way, shape, or form, kind of what we're looking at, like the difference between a jail and a prison, and even then like a federal prison or, one of these other branches of things that are specialties. What's maximum security actually mean? Is it a supervillain complex?
Well, it's all different. And typically, and this is not what I'm about to say is not 100% accurate. So it really depends on the state, the location, and things like that. But when most people think of a jail, the ideal scenario is that is a place for people to go until they're processed. And if they are convicted of a crime, then they would be transferred to a prison, depending on what the sentence happens to be. That's typically it. Now, there are state jails that are different than your county jail. And so that's kind of a mix, if you will. Many of them are not going to serve long-term prison sentences. It's more shorter term. In prisons, you'll find people who have life sentences or multiple life sentences, certainly. And, even inside a prison, it could be a minimum risk inmate. It could be moderate, or it could be maximum, depending on the crime. And then their uniforms actually reflect that in terms of who they are. But I would say that my experience is probably maybe different than the audience if they've never been inside a prison, and it's not like TV. It's just not, for a variety. I mean, so one of the things I think is most people don't think about. I think they watch TV because certainly crime shows are like 57% of everything on the media are crime related shows, and people are just hooked on watching that. And you see those shows up to the point of sentencing, but then after that, you really don't see anything unless it's a documentary. And I think that people think, okay, good, lock them up, throw away the key, let's not think about it anymore. I don't have to think about that. But you might be surprised to know that 50% of American families have someone in prison or someone who has been in prison at some point. That is a lot of people. And so you may not directly feel the impact in your family, but you probably have a friend who has a friend who has gone to prison or something else like that. And at the end of the day is, the thing that I find the most rewarding is, well, many things, but one is the fact we're talking about human beings that did something bad. And yes, should they pay for that? Absolutely. But on the other hand, one bad mistake should not define the rest of your life. I think that we have all had second chances in our life. If we really look back, and it may not have been something so serious as a crime, but somebody said, you know what, you're going to learn from this. And one thing I know with these guys is when they know better, they do better every single time. Every single time.
Well, and I looked up the statistic because I wanted to know, like, oh, how many people are incarcerated? How many prisons are there? And I was really kind of shocked to see that you can almost represent the incarcerated population with a percentage of the country population, where you're like, it's almost 1%.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, oh, that's really awful, because you're like, 1 in every 100 people is in a prison, either, jail, federal, state, whatever. But 1 in 100, that's a lot of people.
It is. It definitely is a lot of people. I watched this really interesting documentary. I can't remember the name of it, a few weeks ago, and they were talking about the number of people in prison, and they compared it against universities. And for every person going to university, there are 22 going to prison. And that was a shocking statistic to me. I had no idea, to tell you the truth. But, the thing is that I think sometimes we're a little naive about our thinking, or maybe TV did it for us. I'm not really sure. But you really can't look at someone and think, oh, that's a murderer, that's not a murderer. It doesn't work that way at all. There's a variety of things that have happened over time. And I think the other thing is, many of us, unless you've been trained in this or you've spent any time teaching in a prison, then you have a completely different perspective. But I think many of us use our own way that we were brought up and use that as our measurement. But however you were raised, however I was raised, however other people were, it's very different for people. And many of these people have gone through a lot of trauma. And, they didn't have a mentor. I just surveyed all of the guys in all the prisons that I'm working in and asked them, how many of you all have had a mentor in your life? And at least 90% have never had a mentor. And I think about that's one thing. Another thing I think about often is that, those dads, and I'm working with a lot of dads in prison, have children on the outside. And those children don't really know how to navigate that. And their moms or, the mothers of the children they're single moms. They're doing the best they can with kids and jobs and everything else and facing all the bills and just the worry, right? And so, in the community, if somebody were maybe prison reform isn't for them, but being a big brother, big sister, or something like that, reaching out to someone in the neighborhood where maybe there's no dad in the house to be able to spend some time with the kids on the weekend or do something else. Mentorship looks a lot of different ways to a lot of different people, but certainly that could be one place where maybe they've never really thought about reaching out and being a helping hand. I think we're a little more isolated in our neighborhoods today than we used to be. Everybody used to be out on the front lawn playing, and everybody's kids played with each other, and the moms are outside and that kind of thing. That's just not the way it is anymore. And so that's one way that it could help. Another thing that people could do if they're employed or employers is become a second chance employer. Now, not all people based on their crime would be appropriate for all jobs. I get that. But on the other hand, this is a human being wanting to make a difference. And, they've already had so many doors be closed to them that the opportunity, and we have such a labor shortage today in the United States. Every industry is suffering and are looking for good people. And that's what, when I'm actually out in the yard of a prison, the open space, and if the guys are out there for an event, for example, maybe it could be a ministry coming in or something like that, and they're outside and you see the thousands of guys out there. And honestly, many of these men have fantastic leadership skills. And it's just, we're not spending time with them to redirect those leadership skills in a positive way. But I think we could solve a number of problems in the United States if we were more open to the possibility of at least considering being a second chance employer.
Well, and I had someone on that had talked about, having second chance hires. And he said there's a statistic that after 5 years of non offense, they are actually less likely to commit a crime than your average person because they know that there is a punishment that can come afterwards. So they are actually more reticent to commit any crime. So they're like, in some ways, hiring a second chance hire is actually more secure than just hiring a random person without a record.
That's good to know. I didn't know that. So that actually makes a lot of sense to me, to tell you the truth. One thing you and I haven't really talked about, but I definitely believe in programming. There's no question in my mind. And I'm definitely seeing the fact that the prisons where they have implemented the program specifically, it just keeps going, right? But the thing is that the more people who go through the program, then we're now increasing the population that have gone through this program, right? And so the skills and what they're doing, and it is a consistent language, and it's safer. So we are seeing that we have less rule violations, less violence, less contraband, lots of less things going on, which makes it safer for the officers and it makes it safer for the inmates. And that's really at the end of the day, that's something I could point to that I'm very proud of them, because I always say to them, we're going to hold you to a higher standard. And, we expect you to do the following things. And, if you're not, you cannot be in the program. And so they really take that very seriously. I think the other thing is that people don't really understand. Again, when you are sentenced and you are transported to a prison, when that door closes, you lose everything, everything. And, they are told when to get up, what time the meal is, what they're supposed to be doing, all of that. Everything is 100% regimented. Like they have no say. And while I like the programming part a lot, I think there's two other parts to this. So there's the prison population, but what about the staff? we're all different people. We all communicate differently. We all come to work with a different attitude sometimes, and all those things. And we get triggered just like everybody else. And so I have a program just for wardens down to the correctional officers so that they can be working on a mentorship program as well and working on things. I also have one just for the kitchen staff, as well as the inmates that work in the kitchen if they are doing their own food service. To me, that is a turnkey solution to talk about real reform.
So, as far as like implementing your program, you had said like a lot of maximum security stuff. Is that kind of where you're seeing it? Is it mostly in like a state prison or is it mostly in privatized prisons?
I'd say all the above. So
Good.
I've been in state jails. I've certainly been in maximum security. I've been in, I just came back from I would say moderate correctional regional facility, which I had never been to. We just implemented the program there and there's more on the way, but they're all different. But people are hungry for information and learning. And, I think it's a breath of fresh air for them to see somebody outside the system to come in and say, we haven't forgotten about you, that we really deeply care about you, and we want to give you the gift of education. Being from education, that's, to me, it's all about learning. And, I have a love of learning. And, what's been so great is every single group has taken to something differently. What I mean by that is I have one group in Florida and they just couldn't get enough of the topics, the 26 topics. So they asked, could they get a book on each one of those topics so they could take a deeper dive? And the programming warden said, absolutely, yes. Another one said, hey, you know what? This is really great. We're learning about ourselves. We want to know more. Could we have a section in the library? And we donated books for the library for self-development. They wanted to do that. We have another group that decided to sort of make I don't want to say a club, but sort of a club to be able to talk about how do we unite as a group to really do the right thing every single day here. I mean, I could go on and on and on about some of the things that they have done that are so inspiring. My first group, they decided that they wanted to have their own rules. They created their own bylaws. Amazing. And guess what? When you create your own bylaws, people will follow the bylaws.
Well, and this is one of those like not all prisons are created equal, right? So we have some prisons that are like drastically underfunded in horrible, like the middle of a desert versus, a well-funded prison in a temperate area. Like those are very different experiences. So, what is the challenge in trying to get a program like this into, hopefully every prison?
It probably is going to be, first of all, it has to be, it's like any other organization. If the leadership buys into this, great. That's step one. They have to believe that something is possible. The second thing are going to be resources. So really, each person in the program needs to have a book. And there are certainly a lot of volunteer organizations that help support prisons locally. Sometimes it could be a church, sometimes it could be a group of teachers, some kind of be just volunteers, depending on what the particular program happens to be. But volunteers can help a lot, be able to help the inmates learn, different things along the way, certainly.
Well, I think it's one of those ideas that people, again, we see like the very televised version of a prison. One of the things that jumps out to me is they're like, oh, well, they have all this access to education that we don't have on the outside. Like, you can just go and get any degree while you're in prison. I'm like, that's 100% not true.
That is not true at all. Now, a lot of prisons do have GED programs, so we need to start there. Now, not everybody needs a GED either. So that, you can't be thinking that way. I think the other thing is like, okay, let's play that out, what you just said a minute ago. You might not know this statistic, but 90% of the people in prison today will get out at some point. Now, that could be years from now. But I think about this because, again, I know prison reform is not everyone's cup of tea, if you will, and we may have very differing viewpoints. But I will say I can bring it home to you, and that is this. If 90% of people who are incarcerated are going to get out at some point and they're going to move into your neighborhood, do you want somebody who's taken advantage of every program they offer at that facility so they can be the best version of themselves when they get out? Or would you like them just to sit around and learn new ways to do really bad things?
Yeah, I mean, you hear a lot of people talk like that's going to school. right? Is like going to prison because you're going to learn trade crafts of other crimes that you didn't already know. You're like, okay, well, instead of that, how about we put you on something productive?
That's why feeling, again, as many programs as a prison could offer is really beneficial to everyone, the staff as well as the inmates, because idle time is when you start to have the kind of violence that you do see on TV. And there are prisons just like that. I'm not suggesting that they aren't. And there are some prisons that are in deplorable shape because they are under resourced. They just haven't. And, there are some prisons, I'm in Houston, Texas. It is hot in the summertime. So can you imagine being in a prison where they didn't have air conditioning or it went out for a few months while they were getting a part or something else? I mean, you're talking about really, and Houston is not the hottest place in the United States by any stretch of the imagination. So it's not like they're sitting around, having a lovely day. They're not. I mean, it is, they are paying for their crime. I can assure you of that.
Yeah, I mean, imagine being locked in a sauna. Like Houston, I think last week somebody had sent me, because I have a bunch of friends down in Texas, that was like 110 degrees. And you're like, okay, 110 degrees and you're in a concrete box. You've been locked in a sauna. Now imagine being locked in a sauna for 3 months. Like just 3 straight months of that. Like
Mhm.
it's an unimaginable experience. And I know, a lot of people will point to that and say, like, well, good, then they won't want to do it again. And you're like, well, it doesn't really work like that.
It really doesn't work like that, And so, like I said, when they learn something new and different, and there's 26 topics, I guarantee there's going to be at least three topics where it's just going to be, oh my gosh, I had no idea. But really, the coolest thing, I think there are many cool things about the program itself, but when I get to hear the stories, and I talk to the programming warden or the warden every single week at every single facility because I want to make sure I'm not on the ground after I do the training and I'll be back. I want to make sure that they have the help they need. But what's really great about, I would say, at least 3 or 4 weeks in, when they're calling home or when they're calling home and they have someone to talk to, they're talking about their homework. They're talking about what they're learning, and it's changing the conversations with families, which is super exciting because it's not the same old, whatever that pattern of communication has been in the past. Probably not always pleasant, probably an argument there or frustration on both halves, right? The person who's left behind and the person who's in prison at the same time, frustrated for different reasons. But now they have something new and different to talk about. And they're even talking with their kids about some of the topics that we're talking about. So in week 3, which is the A part, so it's A to Z, 26 topics. And A is to me most important, regardless of whether you're in prison or not. It's our attitudes about everything, right? And so I always tell them if you're really brave, so they have to interview 5 people. That's a coaching strategy to go interview and uncover your blind spots because most of us probably think we're pretty awesome when in fact we may not be, at least not all the time. And so I always say, you can ask the chaplain, the teachers, the warden, the correctional officers, your bunkmates, whoever. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to say, hey, I've got some homework. I'm taking this class. I need to interview people on my attitude. Can you give me some feedback about my attitude? And I said, whatever they say, your only response is 2 words, thank you. It's not a debate, an argument to justify whatever. That's it. And the other thing is if they say, no, you're pretty awesome, say, well, tell me a time when I'm not, because that's going to help you see something for yourself you haven't. But I said, if you're really, really brave, you'll call home and somebody do this same exercise with someone in your family, and they will be honest with you. You may not want to hear it, but they'll be shocked that you said thank you. And they always come back and report the same thing, which is they told me da 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 da, whatever it happens to be. And I wouldn't say that it's usually surprising, but I think that they didn't see the impact they were making with the family until they heard it out loud.
Well, and this really is, like you said, 26 topics A to Z. It's a lot of introspection. Like you got to look at yourself quite a bit to go through this, and some of that's going to require a lot of discomfort. So, what's the guidelines for like keeping people, in the program when things get hard? Because you've got their mentors and you've got the people being mentored around them. But is there like, something else to keep them accountable and showing up and participating?
So they want to come to class. I will say that. But what I would say is we start out before we even get into A to Z. There's some warm up activities that I'm working with them. So after they get to know their mentees, they go through a writing exercise. It's 7 writing exercises about character strengths. And they have to answer some really tough questions before we even jump into the class. And that part has been really good for them to really think about where are they on this journey of transformation. Some might be in the beginning stages, some might be in the middle stages, some might not have started at all, but this is kind of the opening for that. And there's no make wrong about any of those things wherever you are. We all have something to work on. We may have mastered several things, but we haven't mastered everything. So that's the jumping off point. And then I think that, yes, there are some really difficult conversations when we get into D. At this point, they've probably been in class 5 or 6 weeks, depends on how it's been managed. But D is decision making, and a question that I always share with them that's not really in the book, but at this point, hopefully they built trust in their small group. Everything they talk about is confidential. They can't break that rule because otherwise the trust is totally gone. But I'll say, if you feel comfortable, you feel like you've built trust, and you can say, what decision did you make or not make that got you into prison? And, that's kind of the beginning of, all right, now this is becoming real now. And I really need to own up to basically what I've done and who I've hurt. And sometimes I think in the beginning, I haven't hurt anybody. Maybe it was a victimless crime. There's always a victim. And it isn't just you. What about your mom? What about your kids? What about your friends? And what if there was a victim in the crime? What about their family? And what are they thinking every day when they get up? So it goes on and on and on. And when you have to do that deep, heavy work, that's a lot, right? And there are other programs out there like Bridges to Life, which is amazing. Kairos Ministry is amazing. A lot of programs out there to help support that piece, which that's when real work begins, I really feel like. And then when we get into one chapter that is always not surprising to me, but generally 20% of the guys will say the I for integrity was a big chapter for them. Defining integrity in the way that I have, they've never quite heard it that way. And when you start to kind of really think about what is integrity, it shows up everywhere, right? And so you can't really hide from it after the definition has been shared. And then, of course, I believe, and this is something I know you can relate to. I've certainly heard your story, but when we get to PTSD, and I don't think today you could be in prison and not have some form of PTSD, just because of the sounds, the lights, the things, and everything else. And I think, giving them strategies to prepare for when they are released, because it's going to hit them when they're not expecting it. And so what do I do when I'm feeling that way? What are the things that I can do to keep myself safe and to keep other people safe? And it goes on and on and on. So, we have some fun topics too. It's not all, but, you got to do some of those things, but everything builds on the next thing. So again, it is a lot, but also they have time. So even though we are spending 26 weeks, it's a full week. Even though they're only meeting for a week, they will see each other. It won't be just that conversation. They'll see each other. They'll have those conversations. And then from week to week. So for example, let's say this was the second week when we're in the letters, which B is for behavior. So what did you notice last week about your attitude? Where did you really do well and kind of kept your cool, or what got triggered? And then we do emotional intelligence. The other thing you ask about, and this is where I think is for me an accountability partner and as a coach as well. So when they get into B, they have a habit builder, if you will, that is laid out for them every single day. And they can ask themselves these 5 questions related to whatever they want to focus in on over the next 6 months. And then they're going to rate themselves. They can either say, yes, I'm doing my best too, or they could say yes or no, or they could do a 1 to 10 scale. It's entirely up to them. And there's no judgment. It's just sort of notice, am I better at the beginning of the week working on these things because it's really present, or maybe I'm better at the end of the week, or maybe I am just not a morning person and my attitude isn't what it needs to be. But, in the afternoon, once I'm, some people are morning people, some people are not morning people, that kind of thing. But we do every single week, there's a check-in with the mentor on those habit builder questions to see how it's going. Again, no judgment, but it's like anything else. James Clear wrote the book Atomic Habits, and if you just do 1%, but you've got to have some kind of tracking mechanism to know whether or not you're going to make the progress that you said you wanted to make in the first place.
Well, and that's where the accountability in this, right? Like you have other people you're responsible to, really helps kind of keep you on track and keeps pushing you forward. And really, like learning all the lessons, if you learned everything in the book, you would be all set for a parole board hearing because these are all the things they want to know. Like, what decisions got you here? How is your attitude? What are you doing? Are you ready to really like face the outside world? Because that's an entirely different question. Like, you've been in here for maybe a decade. Are you ready for what the outside world is like? Because it's not, it doesn't function like prison. You've been on a very strict, very regulated schedule in one place, and life isn't like that.
Not at all, and I think, getting ready for that, I think that some of the things that concern them the most probably is how much technology has changed since they've been incarcerated, and they're not prepared for that. Obviously, we don't have the internet in prisons for all the right reasons. And so I think that's one thing, certainly. So it depends on, even if the library has resources that could help them, some of them do, some of them don't. So again, we need to be thinking about all those things, but you're absolutely right. One of the things that I can see firsthand, so remember, I meet them on day one and I'm with them for 2 full days for each one of the programs that I do. And they come in, and just in 2 days, I can see a change. But when I come back 6 months or 9 months later, whenever that is, and sometimes it's not a straight 6 months because of lockdowns and there's nobody's moving anywhere, but and classes are not being held. But I would say that we have a program for our graduation, and typically what happens is we'll have at least 2 to 3 mentors speak and 2 to 3 mentees speak. And these guys who were not used to public speaking will stand up and they are magnificent. I mean, just in terms of what it's meant to them personally, or being a mentor, and what the guys have meant to them and what they've learned from each other. Nobody has power over anybody else. They all learn. The mentors learn as much, if not more, from the mentees. And the beautiful thing about it is those guys in the small group, they're different background, different experience, could be different races, different age. All of that is different. They think differently. So they're learning, how do I work in a world of people who are very different than I am and think differently. So they're getting that practice while they're there in prison, because one of the things I'll say is, this is dress rehearsal for the rest of your life. And if you can't get along with people in here, you cannot get along with them out there, because they will show up. Maybe a different version, but they will show up.
Yeah, none of them are looking over their shoulders to see if a guard's around. They're just going to do the thing they're going to do.
But, I'm really proud of a lot of the guys. They have, like I said, started the program originally, with the guys. And it's interesting in a couple of different places where it's been shared back to me where it's gone both ways. So in one case, they were only maybe 4 weeks into the program, and a guard, I would say, was less than respectful. That's probably a nice way of saying how the person communicated with this person. And the person de-escalated the situation. He de-escalated. And then later that night, the guard came and found him and apologized. That was amazing. We've also had a situation where it actually happened recently, where one of the mentors, we hadn't even finished training, and it was the first night, and he said something he shouldn't have said. And he realized after he calmed down, he shouldn't have said it. And he went looking for that guard. He said, "I am so sorry. I should have never said it. I was totally out of line." And the guard was incredibly gracious. And he said, "You know what, man, the minute I walked out, I totally forgave you. I didn't think about it again." And he didn't have to do that. But that was just the power of one day realizing, you know what, that's not how I need to behave. I need to start changing now what I'm doing and how I react to people, because I can't keep doing this. One thing you said early on, when we started the conversation, one of the things that I'm seeing more and more, and it's getting confirmed by the people, is that this whole time it's been about them, right? They've been thinking about them, me. And what the book is opening them up to, or the conversations is opening them up to, is it's no longer about me. It's about the other people around me, my family. Like, I really do want to reconnect with my family in a new and different way. I really don't want my kids to follow in my footsteps. And I think that's where the impact is really showing up, because, and the families, I mean, they're telling me, their families can say, their moms are saying, their wives are saying, their girlfriends are saying, "You sound different." Or even the kids you sound different, Daddy, in a good way. And that is very rewarding.
It's interesting. I had just thought about this as we were sitting here and talking. I'm like, oh yeah, most prisons are male populations. Like most prisoners are male, right?
Mhm.
Like 9 out of 10. So have you tried this with any female groups of inmates?
So it would work with them. I have not. I've taught career development classes for women, but I have not gone into women's prisons right now. And to your point, it's not that I wouldn't want to do that. It's just that there's so many more people who are male who are incarcerated. And you're right. It's somewhere between 90 to 94% are males and the rest are women. But again, there's opportunities for everybody because at the end of the day, they're just like you and me. We're all human beings, honestly. So anything they're learning, we can learn on the outside too.
I was just wondering because it seems like, having men together with other men that are all in, the same prison system, really like having to acknowledge their emotions and check their behaviors and do these things. It's stuff that we're not necessarily encouraged to do out in the world. Like, I certainly never had a class like this in my real life, and I've never been to prison, but it's definitely beneficial. Like, the people who take it are seeing changes. So I'm wondering if it's such a drastic change for men that if you saw this in the female prison population, they're like, yeah, it's a change, but it's not huge, it's not enormous like the guys.
Well, you're right. I think most men are taught, you don't cry, it's maybe even weird, particularly in a prison, you don't hug guys and all that kind of stuff, right? But what happens over time, and it's usually around 5 weeks because they've been communicating and they built up enough trust with one another. And then they start sharing real things. And that has been probably the best thing for them because they never shared some of the things they're sharing in their small group. I don't know what they are. I just know, generally speaking, I said things I've never said out loud. Certainly, there have been some tears shed for sure, hugs, forgiveness like you can't believe. I've seen it firsthand in the classes where something important to them happened, whatever, and all of a sudden they went to somebody else and asked for forgiveness, and they had never done that before. There was a gentleman in Mississippi who I don't know what it was that he read or what they talked about in their small group, but it was around the week on communication. And I went back and looked, and I didn't think I wrote anything specific about what happened, but he took it upon himself to call his dad. He hadn't talked to his dad in 15 years. His dad took the call, and they had a very positive conversation, decided they wanted to rebuild a relationship that was definitely had been severed. But that is amazing. When families can see the change or they want to have that change, it makes it all worthwhile.
Well, and it's really interesting to have this experiment, this kind of a program in a prison around men because men, I know the psychology behind it, right? Like we form bonds very quickly. And they say any like positive bond that a man has for more than 3 years tends to be lifelong.
Mm.
And you're like, well, by design, you're with these guys for 6 months, getting pretty close with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're in prison, you're kind of always around these people. So you keep this up. You've just got built in bonds and friendships that now you've like naturally built a support network.
Mm-hmm. Well, two things about that. Number one is the research actually says at a minimum, a mentor can make a difference in your life for 10 years, which I certainly know firsthand for me, that is absolutely true. They said in some cases it could be 30 years. It just kind of depends. But I also think the other thing is that when I'm training the guys, it's a group typically between 12 and say 20 all at the same time. And then they have small groups. So typically we'll take a pod at a time. So like 60 people are going through the program. And the interesting thing, though, is that the mentors, I consider them their own community of practice, a professional practice. So if, for example, let's say you're really strong in finance and maybe I'm not as strong, then I want to talk to you about how to prep for next week when we get to F for finance so that I feel like I can have an intelligent conversation with them. Or maybe I could bring you in. I mean, we can do it a lot of different ways so they don't always have to bear the burden. Or maybe they're super passionate. Or we have the opposite true also, which is we may have a guy that's a mentor who's an expert in finance. and And he may take that lesson so much deeper than me. So again, we can rely on one another because we're not all strong in all things. And that's the whole point, is that we can learn something every single day. And even if you're an expert in XYZ, there's still more to learn.
Yeah, you're like, this week's guest lecture actually worked in accounting outside of before this life. So he is definitely the expert. I'm going to go ahead and step back for a minute.
And sometimes we can even call in on staff. So maybe there's somebody, whether it's a peer educator or it's a staff member who's a teacher in the GED program, where their forte picks one of the topics, they can come in and do that too. It can be very different depending on the facility and the level of engagement, for sure.
Sure. So in spreading this program, which is the bigger hindrance? Like having to find prisons that can scrounge up those resources to do this program, or your time to be able to train people? Like, do you need an army of trainers out there that can like drop into prisons every 6 months?
So I think it's really getting the word out to prisons that this program is that, and then just the first obstacle is just making sure that they have money for the books. The books are normally, they're on Amazon. Anybody can get a book. That's not really the problem so much, but they do have money, resources for programming if they choose to do that. That's number one. My ideal scenario, and the truth of the matter is right now, and also my book has been translated into Spanish, and in Texas, that's really important.
Nice.
But my ideal scenario is, and I'm pretty much secure in a couple of states. Usually, if I've been to that prison at least 3 times, somebody has kind of taken the program and kind of made it their own. Like, this is something that they never saw themselves necessarily doing, but it's given them a newfound purpose. And I will always have a conversation with that person and say, would you like to be me? I can train you to be me. And then you can run the program anytime you want to run it. And you don't have to wait for me or anything else. And that is really the model going forward, because in peer mentorship programs have proven, I'm not talking about mine, but just generally what the research says is can reduce recidivism by 40%. And the reason that happens is because it's shared experience. I don't know what it's like to be I'm teaching in a prison, but I get to go home. Let's be real about that. They don't. But when they talk to each other, there's so much credibility there that that's something that you cannot duplicate any other way. And for me, some of these guys find that, you know what, I kind of like this. Maybe I could be a coach, a life coach. Maybe I could, because I had a substance abuse problem, maybe there's a program for me to go help other people. Maybe I'm going to be a motivational speaker. Maybe I'm going to write a book. Maybe I'm going to be able to open my own business. Like, there's tons of things that just come going through the program themselves. They may find their purpose, which is ideal. So now all of a sudden I'm more targeted about what I want to do. The other thing is that when they really get to know each other, for me, that's a built-in network. So in other words, if I'm out and then I know that somebody else is out. So for example, a gentleman that has been out in one of the prisons, he went through my program, got out, worked his plan, just like you said. I'm not going to go into the details. I've told the story a lot of times. I'm so proud of him, but he wants to open a nonprofit, and he's working slowly through that. He's working full time, but he's wanting to do that. He wants to be the guy who's the liaison when guys get out in his community, to be able to say, this is where you go for this service or this resource. And we need a lot more of that. So most of them, when I talk to them, most of the guys say, when I get out, I want to make a difference with youth. I want to make sure they don't take the same path. I mean, goodness sakes, wouldn't that be amazing if we could actually have them? Because again, a lot of credibility. They know it's real talk. It's not like your mom or dad telling you something. You're like, yeah, yeah, yeah. When somebody else has lived this and they're telling you how it really is, you start to pay attention.
Yeah, it's a lived experience. And there really is, we definitely need more of that guy who's ready to like help people reintegrate, because I have heard it is incredibly hard, and by design. It's not like they let you out of prison and they're like, okay, here is your, apartment that you're going to stay at, here is your job you're going to work, here is the food budget you have. They're like, no, you're on your own. You might, maybe if you know someone, you might have a place to stay. Otherwise, like, we effectively kick you out to the street in a hostile world with lots of disadvantages, and we say, figure it out without doing any crime.
Right.
And you're like, okay, well, at week two, when I've been living on the street and I'm very hungry, like, I'm pretty incentivized to do a little bit of crime because, like,
Right.
either I can eat or I get to go back to prison where I know where things work. And that recidivism rate is so high in the US.
It
So,
is.
like,
Absolutely.
anything that could bring that down would be a magic wand.
Well, and you said so many things. I think things we don't think about. So first of all, yes, you could leave with no money. You could leave with $100, or if you're on parole, maybe you'll get $100 when you leave, and maybe another $100 when you meet your parole officer the very first time. But there's some states they don't even give them $100. Some it's $25. What could you do with $25? You don't have a phone. Oh, by the way, what's the transportation? How are you going to get there? And even if you go back to where you were living before, if your family will take you back, that might have been the environment that you left in the first place and got you into trouble. So, I mean, it's so complex, but definitely that, cell phone, job, housing is definitely the first thing. And, if you think that it's difficult to get a job, it's definitely difficult to find a place to rent or to stay. And so, all those things are outlined in the book about all the things they're going to have to think about. But then what are the resources? So, for example, if I had a substance abuse problem, what's the resource in my community that I can go and check in, whether it's AA, NA, my church, something, or, and even I found this shocking. I learned about a couple of weeks ago, and I still cannot get my head around it, is that there are some churches who do not want people who have felony convictions in their church. I don't understand that.
I say it kind of seems to directly oppose the principles that they stand
Mhm.
for.
Yeah. So yeah, it's not a friendly world. And and I always tell them, I don't go in and say, "Hey, this is going to be easy." I'm going to say this is going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. Once you get out, you think it's hard in here? It is going to be so much harder. And I feel like it's necessary to say that because if they think, "Hey, this is going to be a piece of cake and everybody's going to be so happy to see me out," not so much.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, just thinking about like the resources you need to apply for a job, right? Any job for any person. Most of the time now, there's no paper applications. You have to go online, which means you need a computer.
Hmm.
Granted, you could probably get public library access. Some places are free. I know there's one near me that actually charges for their membership. But it's
Wow.
like you have to be able to go in there. Okay, well, it's not your computer, so you can't just set up things that you need, like, oh, here's my resume and here's everything else. Like, you got to do it that moment to
Hmm.
apply for it. Then you have to have a phone that they can call you on and an email they can reach you at. Otherwise, you're not going to get an interview because they can't reach you.
Right.
Like, so just those two things, like, you're already really struggling.
Hmm.
Because you're like,
Absolutely.
and especially with no budget and no outside support, you don't have them. Like, you just don't have those two things.
Yes, that would be an interesting conversation. Or, I was thinking lately, anything interactive in my world is a great way for people to learn. But, just those questions you said, that would be an interesting kind of game to play to say, how would you, if you were in prison for 10 years or 20 years and you got out tomorrow, how would you handle that? What would you do? Well, you don't have money. Oh, and they close at 5 o'clock, and you don't have email, and you don't have a computer, and. Like, how are you going to figure that out? Like, what's the plan?
Yeah, you're like, you don't have any transport? Well, the US isn't transport friendly, so there's no public transit. Like, it just doesn't exist in most cities, most states, in most areas. So, that really is a challenge. And then even getting beyond that, like getting to a job and maintaining a job, you kind of go over some of that in the book where you're like, look, there's some general guidelines you're going to need to follow. And you've got to be a little more strict with yourself about them because you are the second chance hire. If
Mm-hmm.
they picked you up, they probably ran a background check. If they saw the background check and still hired you, they're well aware of what you've done. So, like, you have to be extremely professional and very on top of your own things day to day.
Well, and you said something really important. I think that people get very frustrated because they probably go to the places you and I would go to apply for a job, the normal websites, and they're all really good. And they haven't vetted, those companies haven't been vetted. What I mean by that is I learned about it last year. almost a year and a half ago. I don't know how long it's been around, but it's a website for people who have felony convictions that they vetted all the employers or second chance employers. And it's called honestjobs.com. And, that's what we need more of, the ability to be able to do that kind of work to make it a little bit easier for people to find something so they don't get so frustrated. Because you said something really important. Hey, it's been a couple of days or a couple of weeks and I haven't had a place to stay or eat or anything else. What choice do I have? So if we can make it just a little bit easier, they still have to do all the things anybody else has to do to get a job. But at the same time, one fun thing we've been doing lately is when we get to that career development, I won't be there for that part of that part. And they generally have people on staff too who really have that expertise, which is great to bring them in. But what I've been doing more and more of is lining them all up at one point when we're talking about career development and having everybody shake one another's hands. Now, you may think that's a little silly, but I could tell you all day long about having a professional handshake. But until you experience other people's handshake, you don't get it. And then you go, oh, that's what a professional handshake should be. And it's really interesting to see that it's just something they haven't really thought about. We assume people know how to do that. But when I was at the university, when I was president of the university and I would teach career development there, I love career development. And I would do that with my students. And I did that because women and men sometimes shake hands differently. And you can feel that. So that's an opportunity to make a good first impression. That handshake, it can be everything, right? And so the eye contact and all the things that you need to, I like practicing that. We practice difficult questions about where have you been for the last 10 years and those kinds of things. And all that's in the book as well, because you don't want to be surprised during a job. If you're fortunate enough to get the job interview, you don't want to be surprised by any of those. We also start out in the very beginning in week 1. And the getting to know you guide, which is them getting to know each other, is, tell me about yourself. I always think that's a trap question that employers ask because some people don't know when to stop. They don't know where to start. They don't know when to stop on that question. So
Yeah,
they
let's not
really didn't mean from
overshare.
birth.
Yeah, well, and this comes full circle to you on this show right now. Like, people hearing from you may not know that like this second chance opportunity stuff is out there. And maybe you're in a small company or you own your company. You might want to reach out to Honest Jobs and say like, hey, I'd like my company to be added because I do appreciate having this resource that other people just aren't open to. And you say that to your boss or being the boss and doing those are huge steps that you're positively impacting people's lives as well and helping them avoid that, several weeks down the road when things are really, really hard. Like, you're helping to avoid that and you just don't know about it until you have this conversation. Like, I never knew that there was a website that had jobs specifically geared towards people who had a felony record.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I think too, and when I was talking about the kitchen program, is that when the guys are going through that program, part of that is they can sit for the ServSafe certification if the prison will fund them to sit for the test. But what's great is for people in the restaurant industry in particular, if that guy can show you he has a certificate, they've just saved you money and time, and they know what the protocol is for sanitation and safety and food production. I'm going to tell you what, I'd put any guy working in a kitchen up against anybody in a kitchen today because they have to get out thousands of meals 3 times a day and they can handle it. And so you're talking about somebody who really knows what they're doing. And there's a ton of talent in the kitchen. So again, the hospitality industry got hit so hard after COVID and still have not really recovered. And they may not be thinking that way, but it certainly would be another, avenue for employment.
Well, it's a great way to, some of those questions when I think about, when they're like, well, what's a stressful time you had to endure in a cooking environment? You're like, I had to cook for thousands of people, many of them known murderers. And the person behind the table is like, I cannot relate to this. You're like, yeah, it's a little more intense than what you're expecting, huh?
Definitely.
So, I think that would be fun. I think this whole thing has been very educational, and thank you very much for showing up for this. I appreciate your time. I want to make sure people can find your book and where to find more from you if they're looking for more.
Sure. Probably the fastest place to find me is go to my website, which is www.drdr, Nugent Speaks, Nugent Speaks.com, or Amazon. All of my books are on Amazon. And this book that we're talking about today is called From Prison to Possibilities, Paving Your Path.
Of course, and I will put links to those in the show notes, so anybody who's looking for them, there is a very, very easy process to find it. So
Great.
again, Kim, thank you so much for being here. This has been wonderful.
Thank you so much. It's my favorite topic to talk about, Colton.
If anyone out there knows a warden or veteran corrections officer or experienced Department of Justice worker, I would love to get them on the show and do a deeper dive on prisons for what isn't common knowledge. That same thing goes for anyone who has served a long stint in prison, as I think both sides of the situation have very valuable experience we could learn from. In ranking news, August is chugging along, and global rankings are now as follows. Number 1, the United States, with California, Michigan, and Washington now out front. Number 2, Australia, with Victoria taking on Western Australia. Number 3, England of the United Kingdom now leading their Scottish partners. Number 4, Canada, with Ontario taking a huge lead. And number 5, Ireland battling it out with the Netherlands. That's it for this week. Have a great week, a great weekend, and I'll see you all back here next week for another new episode. Until that next episode, pretty pleased to all those things that help the show grow, like rating, reviewing, liking, and subscribing. Also, remember you can reach out to dumbenoughpodcast@gmail.com or on any of the social medias if you want to reach me personally. But most importantly, stay dumb.